Hello and welcome to Byjus Exam Prep IAS. As part of a comprehensive news analysis today, we'll be discussing 5 important articles out of the Hindu newspaper Delhi edition. Before we begin, you already know that we are on Telegram. If you haven't joined us there, do use the QR code given here or the link given in the description below so as to download the app and not miss any of our videos. Let's begin analysis with something which has been in the news for quite a long time now, which is Russia and Ukraine, and now the new developments with regards to this. First is that after a very long time, since the 7 months this war has started, Vladimir Putin has again announced a partial mobilization, military mobilization of people against the Ukrainian forces. Along with that, he has been talking about nuclear threats. This is very significant because 1,50,000 people had been mobilized initially 7 months back. On 21st September, he has now again asked for further mobilization of 3 lakh people for this war. But the most important development in the Russia-Ukraine story are the referendums which are going to happen or are happening in the Ukraine areas which have been occupied by Russia. So in the regions such as Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson and Zaporozhye, there are referendums as of right now happening done by Russia for asking this question that do they want to be part of Russia. We already know what is going to be the answer, but Putin is actually in a very tight spot at this point of time. These referendums we already know will be all staged, so all 4 regions will talk about going back to Russia in that regard, therefore moving the boundaries a little bit further into Ukraine. But Ukraine is also not backing down. With the Kharkiv area being taken back by Ukrainian forces, we believe that the mobilization of men, the 3 lakh men who have been now mobilized, is a dual strategy in which either it could go south or Russia would be in a better position. But as of right now, what we know is that Russia is in a tight spot because with the Kharkiv area going back to the Ukrainians liberating it in that regard, and with the Luhansk, Zaporozhye, Kherson and the Donetsk area, all 4 going into referendum, Russia is trying to strengthen its position. However, the mobilization itself is not very popular within Russia, and the fact of the matter is NATO is also creating a lot of pressure on Russia at this point of time. Therefore, Russia, with its supply chain problems and the supply problems generally also exaggerated because of the manpower shortage which is there in this front itself, is leading to Russia to now mobilize further. So the Ukrainian forces are fighting back in a much better way, and Russia is facing a major issue of sending the materials to this front, and more than that, they have now untrained men actually guarding this sector itself. And the fact of the matter is that in reality Russia has reached a level where it cannot sustain its military gain without further troop mobilization, which is something technically new. Because when Putin started this battle, he thought that it will be a quick battle, he would be able to push through till Kiev, but that didn't happen. Ukraine has the support of the NATO countries, therefore it is pushing back in a very strong way, and this has now become a problem for Russia itself, and Putin, as I said, is in a very tight spot. This topic is something we've been talking about for a very long time, but with new developments it becomes important to discuss it. The nuclear threats are coming from time to time, but we technically don't know what is going to be the impact of that, and is Putin just bluffing in that regard. But the basic point is the current situation is that the way Russian war in Ukraine is happening, they have to mobilize further because they can't sustain the counter attack of the Ukrainians. So as of right now, the defense minister of Russia has called upon all the reserves and those who have served in the armed forces or have got military training, who have now been conscripted against the war in Ukraine. Russia can mobilize close to 25 million people for this, but it is only bringing in 1% of what they can mobilize, only 3 lakh troops, and they believe that the 1.5 lakh which were mobilized previously 7 months back plus these 3 lakh can hold on and push further in that regard. However, this general need for manpower by the generals, and over and above that the general mobilization leading to a lot of nationwide unpopular protests, puts Putin in a very difficult position because he needs these men, and internally his policies are now becoming unpopular because nobody wants to go to war. This was a war which was induced by his own ambitions, and now he needs more forces. 1.5 lakh was not enough. NATO weapons and NATO countries supporting Ukraine meant that he needs to now further push into Ukraine with much greater force in that regard. But he is doing this simultaneously with something which was not done till this point, which are referendums or voting with regards to do these regions want to be part of Russia or Ukraine. And the four regions which they are holding, Donetsk and Luhansk, are already considered industrial areas and republics by the Russian Republic itself. These are the Donbas area. These two areas are technically the proper industrialized zones of Donbas. They were already recognized by Russia as independent republics. And the next sector, which is parts of Kherson, which are the port cities which are controlled by Russia at this point of time, and Zaporozhye, which includes the biggest and the largest European nuclear power plant, are also under the control of Russia. So what Russia is technically doing is, in these four regions, which is Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson and Zaporozhye, these four regions are now going for a referendum, and in with regards to what is their basic mandate, what is the people's mandate in that regard. And the separatists have been planning to hold the referendum for quite a long time. However, with Kharkiv going out of the hands of Russia, this has been preponed in that regard. Now, what are the implications of this? And this is a very important one. This is why we are discussing this topic, because the implication is very, very big. And everything which happens hereafter is equally important in that regard, which is that what needs to be seen is if and when Moscow recognizes the referendums and annexes these territories, because we know what is going to happen. Russia is going to rig the elections and the referendum will say that we want to be part of Russia. If Moscow does it, Ukraine's borders would be redrawn for good this time, properly, because the people's mandate will be shown, and it would require greater commitment from the Kremlin to defend these territories. And more than that, the capture of the next set, which is still with the Ukrainians, will also become a challenge. So the point is that these referendums are the new aspect which Putin has added into the larger foray, because this was never the plan initially. The initial plan was a major push into Ukraine, getting the areas Kharkiv, Donetsk, Luhansk and Zaporozhye, but Kharkiv went out of their hands. With Kharkiv going out of their hands, now they have preponed the referendum idea, and this means that they can now, showing that people's mandate is there, they can shift the boundary in that regard. So this is the major development in this story, and we will be following this story as it goes on. But we already know that Kharkiv went out of their hands, but in response to that, 3 lakh men are now being mobilized. Over and above that, we also have the concept of the elections happening in the Russia occupied Ukraine. Now, what is the end game here? Because Putin needs to find a way to figure out how he can stabilize this war itself, because it's now going out of his hand and Ukraine is pushing back quite a lot. So if Russia with its additional troops turns around the course of the war, it would strengthen the hand of Kremlin, which would go for annexation of the territories, shutting the path to peace. Basically, if these 3 lakh men are successful in pushing back the Ukrainian sector, then we don't see peace in the horizon itself. However, if the mobilization fails, because there is a major protest in Russia at this point of time against this mobilization, then Putin's position becomes vulnerable in the domestic front, which could then lead him to take drastic measures and even follow a peace plan. So before we go to the next topic, why have we done this topic? Everybody knows about Russia and Ukraine, but there are new developments. Previously, Kharkiv was taken back. We know that 4 regions which were under the Russians, which would have gone into referendum maybe later, have now gone into referendum as we speak, because of the fact that Russia has seen a major setback in Kharkiv. Russia is in a tight spot at this point of time. General mobilization is needed. People need to be mobilized. The war can only go forward if they have the right manpower. Supply issues are there. At the war front, they are actually not performing very well. So Putin has to push in this. However, in the domestic front, the more Russians he uses, the more unpopular he becomes. So there's a very fine line we have to draw here. So there's a very fine line he's trying to draw here, which is that he's trying to remain popular. He's trying to get people support for the Ukrainian war. At the same point of time, he has to also look at the Ukrainian counter-offensive. So in that regard, this topic is a developing topic. We will keep on developing on it. His nuclear threats are plausibly just rhetoric, and we believe that he would not do something like that. But with Zaporozhye going into his hands, the Europe's largest nuclear power plant is with him. He was bombing it itself. It would be better that he takes that area, because if the nuclear power plant is hit in some way or the other, it could lead to a major nuclear disaster. So when we talk about this issue, it's not the end. However, we'll keep on following this story. But as of right now, it is important for you to know that now they're staging a rigged referendum, which is automatically going to lead to the shifting of the Ukrainian boundaries with the mandate of the people, and we don't know how we will go forward in that regard. Maybe Russia has to take a better stance. If they move further inwards and add these areas into Russia, then the international boundaries also shift, and if that is the case, Ukraine will also have an uphill task to push back the Russians with the referendum behind the Russians. So it's a mess, proper mess in that regard, and we need to see how it develops in that regard. But I hope that you understand why are we doing this topic today. Now, the next topic which we have to discuss is an operation. These become very important in the context of prelims, specifically Operation Megh Chakra or be it Operation Carbon. Operations can just be given in a very simple question in the context of Operation Megh Chakra, which was recently in the news. What does it refer to? So it can be a very simple question with regards to what does it refer to. So Operation Megh Chakra, important for GS paper 3 generally, because the concept of internal security comes in. It is actually linked to child pornography. So the Central Bureau of Investigation, the CBI, on Saturday conducted searches at 59 locations across 20 states and 1 union territory as part of a pan-India drive against the circulation and sharing of child sexual abuse material. The operation, which is codenamed Megh Chakra, was actually carried out after we got inputs from the Interpol, specifically the Singapore branch, and from the authorities in New Zealand. So it is technically a worldwide concept in which we are trying to crack down any form of child pornography which is available on the internet. Under our IT Acts, it is already illegal, but this is more above just being illegal. Children should not be subjected to such form of abuse, and in any world, in any country, in any scenario, it is one of the worst forms of abuse a child can go through. Therefore, this Megh Chakra and Carbon have become important. So last November, the agency had launched a similar exercise codenamed Operation Carbon. Please remember these two terms for the exam: Operation Megh Chakra and Operation Carbon. Megh because there has been a new breakthrough, because they have found a cloud in which cloud technology with regards to storage, they found a cloud storage in which they have now evidence against these men. So last year it was called Operation Carbon. This year it's been called Operation Megh Chakra. And under Carbon, 13 states and 1 union territory, there was a lot of searches which happened in the same way. The CBI was later able to get a lot of information, and that turned out to be a racket which was happening at the international level. And under the mutual legal assistance treaties, we have involved other countries also. This is also an important development, an important word for you, because when it comes to Interpol and when it comes to international assistance, it is the mutual legal assistance treaties which are used. Then the probe also led to identification of close to 50 groups and 5,000 offenders in this regard. And what is the legal procedure in India with regards to child pornography or child abuse? Section 67B of the IT Act 2000 makes publishing, transmitting, viewing, downloading child pornography illegal. And according to section, any person who has not attained the age of 18 is a child. And under section 292 of the IPC, sale of obscene material is criminal offense. So technically it's a criminal offense also, and it is technically illegal under the IT Act. So there's a very robust form of legal procedures around this. However, people are still defying it, and we are discussing this topic today because we have a new breakthrough in this regard. Because of the New Zealand and Singapore information, the CBI has registered 2 cases alleging that a large number of Indian nationals were involved in the online circulation, downloading and transmission of such material using cloud-based storage, and this is why it's called Megh Chakra. And over 50 persons have come under the scanner. The searches were actually carried out in Himachal Pradesh, Punjab, Haryana, Delhi, Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, Maharashtra, Gujarat, Goa, Karnataka, Telangana, Tamil Nadu, and all of these suspects, their devices have been now seized, and we've also found material which could be used against them in the court of law. Now, why is this topic important? It's important because in UPSC we always get these terms. So Operation Megh Chakra and Operation Carbon becomes important. This is the major takeaway from here. Over and above that, 67B under IT Act can be asked in the mains exam, that in the context of section 67B of the IT Act, the UPSC may not tell you what does that act or section actually mean. So you need to know that 67B actually goes with child pornography, and 292 of the IPC is against all forms of obscene material being circulated. And it is important because at the end of the day, it is one of the worst forms of abuse a child can go through. And in India, we have groups which are operating at an international level. Therefore, the CBI should be supported and is being supported by the government to crack down on it. And for us, it becomes important for the prelims in that regard. So the short summary in the end is the fact that you have to learn the two names. So we've done first Russia-Ukraine, where we understood the concept of the referendums, and now we've understood the concept of Operation Megh Chakra. Remember, Megh itself is the giveaway in the exam. If you're not able to remember cloud storage and Megh. Now let's move to the third topic, which is related to art and culture. We now know that art and culture in the exam, prelims or be it the mains exam, is not coming in isolation. It is coming with regards to current affairs. Therefore, it becomes important to understand the Sittanavasal murals which are there and the caves which are there in the Tamil Nadu sector. And this has come into limelight because of the very pitiable state of the Sittanavasal murals itself. What I'll try to do is I'll try to give you more context and more information about it, and we'll try to revise these caves here itself. First and foremost, what is a mural? Mural is any painting on a big canvas or on any surface which is bigger than a miniature painting. Murals can be of two types. Murals can be in the form of watercolor paintings or frescoes. Fresco is something when you paint something with water soluble paints on a wet plastered wall. So you allow the plaster to absorb the water, therefore absorbing the pigment itself. However, we get to know a new technique which was used in the Sittanavasal caves, and that is why we are discussing it here. Generally, the news is related to a very pitiable state. However, it becomes an opportunity to understand art and culture in the context of current affairs. So the arts in Sittanavasal have either been damaged or vandalized, and the ASI is now very concerned about the conservation of these paintings, which date back to close to 1000 years. And basically now there is a push to conserve and make possible digital checks to track public access itself, and they're trying to now install CCTVs, but it's too late in that regard because the damage is actually major and irreversible in that regard. When we talk about Sittanavasal itself, it is in the Pudukkottai district of Tamil Nadu, and it is a Jain center. So this is the first thing which you need to remember when it comes to cave architecture, murals and paintings. Religion becomes important. It's a Jain sector and it dates back to close to 1000 years before the Christian era or CE in that regard. So let's try to further understand why are we discussing it. When we talk about Sittanavasal, just when you look at the basic paintings, you can make out that it has a major connection with Ajanta, because Ajanta also has this concept of what are called half closed eyes, and that has gone forward into Sittanavasal. But what is more important is, which you need to realize, is that though they are Jain caves and Ajanta is fully Buddhist, there is still very similar connections, which means that the artists were the same. And when it comes to artists, art and architecture, there was a lot of tolerance. Be it two different religions, they were taking a lot of elements from each other in that regard. Therefore, this becomes an important site of syncretism between Jainism and Buddhism. More than that, as I said, the murals have close resemblance to Ajanta and Bagh, and the cave paintings are mostly on the walls, ceilings and the pillars. They are murals. As I said, I'm repeating myself. When we talk about murals, murals is any painting which is done on a big canvas. It could be any material, it could be any canvas, just bigger than Mughal miniature paintings, and it's very common on the ceilings and on the walls of temples in that regard. So when we talk about Sittanavasal itself, it is actually a name given for a whole set of monuments which is found in this sector in Tamil Nadu. Here we have a small hamlet and houses of the Arivar Kovils. There's also a set of caves with 17 polished rock beds. It is a site which even has a megalithic burial site, which links it to a period much before the period we are talking about, which is that this more or less dates close to the Pandya Pallava period, Pandya first and then Pallava period. But we have a megalithic burial site, so it technically goes back as late as the Vedic period in that regard. And we also have a small mountain lake with a submerged shrine in it. Sittanavasal is very important in that regard when it comes to the larger history of this region. So let's further try to understand what is the theme, because I'm trying to just cover all static with you here, so you don't have to go back to any book, be it Nitin Singhania or any other book. We can just discuss it here because it is in the news. So let's just take this opportunity to revise it here itself. So the theme here is actually Jain Samavan Sarna, which is nothing but a preaching hall or an audience hall where the Jai Tirthankaras used to actually deliver their sermons when they used to realize their larger understanding and enlightenment. When they reached realization and enlightenment, they used to preach. But what is more important for us are the symbols which are used, such as the bull, elephant, apsaras and gods, which were gathered in this hall, very beautifully depicted, and you can see it is actually on the wall and on the ceiling of this temple and these caves itself. The murals exhibit a water tank, or what is called the Katika Bhumi, which are shown with the tank made of tiles filled with lotus flowers and surrounded by bhavyas, who are called the faithful elephants, fishes, one fish shown as jumping out of the water, and the pillars itself are very beautifully carved in that regard. So there's a lot of imagery with the context of the 2022 paper asking you about basic animal imagery becoming important. It is important to know that this Sittanavasal paintings have a very specific depiction of certain understandings and certain Jain imagery in that regard, or what we call as iconography. One basic question is, when do we date these caves to? Which is, you have the only Pandya period painting in Sittanavasal, and then we see under Mahendravarman I that this area is again revived under the Pallavas. So when we talk about the basic history of this area, Sittanavasal is the only place in Tamil Nadu where we see Pandya paintings, and the artwork on the ceiling of the sanctum and the Ardh Mandapam of the Arivar Kovil is an early example of post Ajanta cave paintings of the 4th to 6th century period, in what is called the fresco secco technique. This is a new technique. I need to talk about secco and what is the difference between fresco and fresco secco. Fresco, as I told you, is that once the wall is prepared, you put in a plaster and don't let the plaster dry. You paint while the plaster is actually drying, and you use paint which is water soluble so that the plaster absorbs the water and then takes the color. However, secco is totally different. In this, you allow the painting or the surface itself, the plaster, to dry. However, they use the limestone water or limestone solution in which the paints are mixed, and therefore they are applied on the dried plaster. So when it is wet plaster, it means fresco. When it is dried plaster, it means secco. So if the pigment are mixed with lime water, lime milk, and applied on a dry plaster, the technique is called lime secco painting. The secco technique contrasts with the fresco technique, where the painting is executed on a layer of wet plaster. This is a major difference between these two. Again, can come in the exam in that regard. The colors are plant dyes. Mineral elements such as lime, lamp black, and clay pigments are also used for the colors, such as ochre for yellow and the tereverth of the greenish gray tints. Now, as I said, before I move on to the Rohini rockets, the basic point is, so why have we done this topic? There can be three type of questions which can come from this area. First is that how and why do we need to conserve our heritage, and the mitigation technologies and mitigation techniques are very, very important. Second is, what is fresco mural painting itself, and what is the difference between fresco and secco. And third is why Sittanavasal very important, gives us the reference to the first Pandyan paintings, and over and above that revived during the Pallava period. So it's a very important question, and now it would not be a surprise that in the prelims exam or in the mains exam you could get mural paintings as a question in 2023. So please note that art and culture is not independent of current affairs, because the trend is telling us that in that regard. Now let's move to our fourth topic, which is ISRO's Rohini RH200 rockets. On the birth anniversary of Satish Dhawan, it is actually very fitting that we're discussing something about ISRO. So when we talk about the Rohini RH200 rockets, it is going to reach a very important milestone very soon, either in October or in November, which is 200 successful consecutive flights of the RH200 Rohini rockets, which are called sounding rockets. They are experimental rockets. So you have the GSLV, you have the PSLV. These are bigger satellite rockets. These are the rockets with which our ISRO started in the beginning. These are very humble rockets, not very sophisticated two-stage solid or solid liquid in that regard, but basically these were very important to develop the basic technologies to go forward to send a satellite into the Mars orbit in that regard. So it becomes very important in that context, because these rockets you have never heard of. So the UPSC can ask you about Rohini RH200 and you would not know why they're in the news or why have they been asked about. So though it's a very small news and it is fitting to discuss something related to ISRO on his birth anniversary, which is Satish Dhawan's birth anniversary, however, it is generally important for your science and technology and GS paper 3. So let's try to discuss the basic idea and what is the concept of the Rohini rockets in that regard. So they are 3.5 meter tall RH200 rockets, a trusted member of the Rohini sounding rockets family used by ISRO for atmospheric studies and basic rocket technology demonstrators, has completed 199 consecutive flights from Thumba itself, Vikram Sarabhai Space Center. When RH200 were actually introduced by the ISRO, the focus was actually on spin stabilization, solid motors and atmospheric studies, the initial period in which ISRO was becoming important. Sounding rockets have since been used for a variety of experiments, and basically even eclipses have been studied via sounding rockets. But let's try to understand the history of Rohini RH200, because it can come in the exam as a mains question under GS paper 3. So I want to give you the specifications and generally a little bit more about it. So the RH200 rocket is a two-stage rocket and can climb up to 70 kilometers, bearing scientific payload. So not a very heavy payload, but basic things can be there. Solid, liquid, solid, both have been used in that regard. The first and the second stage are powered by solid motors, which is the most common in that regard. And the 200 actually denotes the diameter of the rocket itself in mm. There are other versions of the Rohini RH, which is RH300 Mark II and RH560 Mark III. So now we know what that 200, 300 and 560 means, which is the mm, that is the diameter of the rocket itself. Sounding rockets have been an important part of the ISRO story. The first sounding rocket was actually launched from Thumba, and this was launched in 1963, November 21st, 1963, and it was actually called the American Nike Apache rocket. It was not ours. We had actually taken it from the Americans, and that was a test we did under the Rohini series itself. So November 21st, 1963. Thereafter, two-stage rockets imported from Russia, M100, France, were then flown, and ISRO launched its own version finally in 1967, which is called the Rohini RH-75. So they started with 75 mm, they went on to 200, now 300, and 560 is also available to us. The ISRO has launched more than 1600 RH200 rockets so far, and the rocket celebrated its 100th consecutive mission in 2015. Over the years, the rocket has served as a flexible platform for experiments and testing new technologies. It's a very significant part of our history. It's a very significant part of ISRO history. So remember, again, summary, understand one thing. RH200 based on the MM200. It's a sounding rocket, two-stage, mostly solid. It is based on the concept of experimental and rocket technology based demonstrators. It is a expendable rocket. We used it for different purposes. We only developed it in 1967 itself, but before that it became important. Today is Satish Dhawan's birthday, so it will be very fitting to thank him for his contribution to this nation. And over and above that, remember that these rockets now seem very simple to the ISRO, but this is where we started our journey to become a superpower in the space. With this, we enter our last topic, which is actually related to cows and a major disease which is spreading in India at this point of time. We sometimes tend to forget that animal and plant health is also very, very important. So we'll talk about the lump skin disease virus, which has been in the news quite a lot at this point of time, but Hindu gave a proper article about it and its genome sequencing. And what is the most concerning aspect about this virus is it is mutating very, very quickly and now has elements of close to 12 different countries in that regard. So it is a viral disease predominantly which affects cattle, and we have a very big cow population in India, so it is a major scare in that regard. Recent outbreak has been there and the mutation has now become an issue important for GS paper 3. Now, it was first actually identified in Zambia in 19 29. Lumpy skin disease, as it is called, LSD virus, LSDV, is a pox virus because it leads to certain boils which come on, or what are called isolates, which come on the skin of the cow itself. And until the 1980s, it had just been confined to the African continent. There were multiple outbreaks, but was in African continent itself, LSD itself. The first reports of infection outside Africa were in 1989 from Israel. 2016 we had reports from Russia and Southeast European nations. Thereafter we properly had an outbreak all across the Asian sector in 2019 once Indian subcontinent reported it, along with Bangladesh, China, India, Nepal, Bhutan, Vietnam, Hong Kong and Myanmar. So it became a major issue in 2019. But what is more concerning is that between 2019 and 2022 it is mutating very quickly. It is spreading like wildfire, and it is mutating, and it can actually affect the health of the cattle quite a lot. So the use of the vaccine, which was developed in 2016 itself, also did not actually end this outbreak. There was no real impact on it, and subsequent vaccine like isolates were obtained from cattle from 2017. So what actually happened is vaccines are either inactivated viruses or it is a dead virus. What happened was, with the vaccine being introduced into the cattle, the virus itself mutated with vaccine genomic sequencing, and the isolates, as they're called, boils, now started to become even more sophisticated in their genomic sequence. So basically this virus is very active in mutation, and that is why it is now becoming a problem for India itself in that regard. So in July of 2022, large outbreak of LSD was reported from Gujarat and Rajasthan. From then later 11 different states, close to 80,000 cattle deaths were linked to LSD. And what we see is that the phylogenetic analysis of the isolates, as I said, isolates is that lump which is formed on the skin of the animal, showed that the current virus strand is unrelated to the virus found in India, as well as other global genomic sequencing of the LSD virus itself. The closest genomes of the viral isolates from the current outbreak comprise of 12 sequences belonging to other Asian and European countries collected from 2012 to 2022. So for 10 years we have been seeing mutations, and what we see today in India, these 80,000 cattle have died because of a virus which does not even resemble the virus which was there in India in 2019. It resembles something which is a mix of 12 different Asian and European countries. Therefore, the presence of an additional mutation in 2 samples from the same animal and the large number of mutations potentially suggests that the LSDV, the lumpy skin disease virus, was able to evolve fast within the host itself. And this is a very major issue, because we, being an agrarian country, need to make sure that we are always on top of these mutations, because 80,000 cattle, for some of our farmers, they are the only way to survive. So we need to accept that animal and plant health are key to human health and forms one of the most important basis of one health, which is plant, animals and humans. More than that, as we are moving towards an industrialized agricultural sector in climate change period, we need to be prepared for all forms of mutations in molecular surveillance and digital technologies which can identify and stop pathogens. So with this, we've done all 5. A very short summary of everything what we've done today. First, we tried to understand Russia and Ukraine. We already knew that there was a war there. We knew that Kharkiv was actually taken back by Ukraine. However, there's a new development with regards to referendums. These referendums are happening in the 4 regions which were occupied by Russia. We know what is going to be the result, but now there is a new people's mandate aspect involved in this whole story. Over and above that, with the general mobilization happening in Russia, which is quite unpopular within Russia itself, Putin is in a spot. Then we moved on to a very important concept with regards to Megh Chakra, Operation Megh Chakra and Operation Carbon, which is linked to child abuse and child pornography, you need to understand one thing is what are the sections which are involved. 67B, 292. The two names for prelims is very important, Operation Megh Chakra and the second one being Operation Carbon. Third, we discussed the Sittanavasal caves, something very unique in that regard, which is art and culture in current affairs, a new aspect which UPSC is now picked up. Sittanavasal dates back to the Pandyan period. Thereafter Pallava period there is revival. There are caves, there is a megalithic burial also there. More than that, there are murals there. Murals is a type of painting done on large surfaces. Fresco is when the plaster is not dry, it is wet, and secco is when it is dried up and the limestone milk or limestone water is used to paint on the surface itself. The theme is Jain, and there are very beautiful iconographic pictures of the Jain period itself related to Tirthankaras, and their mitigation becomes important in that regard. Thereafter, we talked about the Rohini rockets, Rohini RH200, a major milestone, 200 consecutive successful flights. It's a very important rocket because it is the stepping stone to our own space technology. It is there from where we started to develop bigger rockets, GSLV and PSLV, and in the end we talked about the lumpy skin disease, LSD. This is a cattle specific disease. It is a very important disease for our farmers because it is affecting our farmers quite a lot. It is mutating very quickly. We can't ignore it, and we need to develop technologies through which we can actually track and develop vaccines which are better for the cattle itself. With this, let's look at the mains questions for today. In the context of the Sittanavasal murals, discuss the measures to mitigate the irreversible damage to our heritage. Second, the Rohini RH200 rockets were the stepping stone to our space program. Elucidate here, you need to talk about the significance in that regard. Thank you so much for your patience. I hope that you enjoyed the CNA. If you did, do like and subscribe to our channel. Thank you so much. Take care. Bye bye.